So something I've been thinking about the last day or two is, as I've had some conversations with different people, you would imagine when I have conversations, because I like to learn and understand and ask questions, and probe and push a little bit, depending on the audience, but it can at times get a little bit contentious, right? Whenever you're asking questions, you run the risk. And, I try and do it, package it the right way, but still, it happens at times. Rarely does it ever get really contentious and like out of hand, but it gets contentious. And as I've had some of those conversations and I've talked to some people about it, and in the moment, kind of trying to understand, like, hey, why do you think you're getting defensive right now? And we've talked about a lot of this stuff, that when emotions get involved, when when your identity gets involved, and you're trying to protect that, that leads to that defensiveness, right? You feel so strongly about this thing, this topic, this view. It's tied to your identity. It's so emotionally charged that you're going to get defensive. And I get that, and obviously I believe that. What I'm trying to understand is kind of the deeper level, right? The next level why, if you would, on that. But why, right? Why is that something that our minds are protecting against? And I'll phrase it a little bit differently to kind of get to the key point of the question. Why that over other things, I guess, is the question, right? So this whole idea of getting defensive oftentimes is rooted in some fear or insecurity, right? A lot of the times there's a fear of, I'm gonna look stupid or be embarrassed or be proven wrong, and I don't want that, right? My ego can't handle that. The idea that would happen to me. If I'm having a discussion with you on a topic and you're more knowledgeable, or you prove in some way that my logic is off, or that I'm being inconsistent in how I'm applying it, or I have some bias, more times than not, you'll get a kickback on that, right? If people don't really have a healthy self-awareness and approach to trying to find objective truth, right? They're not going to take that new learning and that you expose some flaw in their thinking and say, oh, hey, thanks for that. Like, I'm glad I now know that. In theory, they should do that, but they don't. So they'll get angry because they're afraid. They don't want to look stupid. They don't want to be embarrassed, right? You can think of it as that. And not always the case, but let's just talk about those cases where that is the reason or the main reason. So the person might get angry, they might yell, they might insult you, they might get mean, they might do a whole host of things to protect against that. And you have to ask yourself, well, if the idea is you're trying to protect your image, again, you don't want to look stupid, you don't want to get embarrassed, why are you comfortable sacrificing other parts of your self-image? Why are you comfortable sacrificing looking humble or compassionate or reasonable even? Why is it that we seem to say the more important thing here is that you don't think I look weak or stupid when you don't embarrass me, right? That's the important thing. I need to ensure that doesn't happen. And I'm willing to have you think that I am arrogant or ignorant or mean-spirited, right? Or unreasonable. I'm okay with you, because in effect, that's what we're saying, right? I'm okay with you thinking those things, but I'm not okay with you thinking that I'm incompetent or that I'm weak or that I don't know what I'm talking about. It's a very strange thing if you think about it. And if you believe, as I do, that there's a universal principle of logic that kind of governs the world, and evolution falls into that category, you would say, well, what's the evolutionary benefit of that? What's the benefit of optimizing for one over the other? And if you step back and you look at people that are in positions of power today, you might say, well, I guess that's the evolutionary benefit. This whole concept of kind of old-fashioned concept, but same thing. Nice guys finish last. Kind of comes into play here. It is the assertive, the aggressive, the ones who don't show weakness or show incompetence and are willing to sacrifice those other factors for that seem to move ahead. They seem to get to positions of power. And perhaps there's some dynamic there that's, for much of us as a human race, that's what we respond more to. It's more of an animalistic kind of strong survive. And we look for the alphas to be the ones that lead. So even on a micro basis in conversation, that's ingrained in us. And we don't want to give up any of that. We want to assert ourselves and show the kind of that alpha nature in any conversation or any discussion. It's just inherent and ingrained in how we act. And that results in us making the decision to say, I will yell at this person and risk having them think I'm an asshole before I let them think they know better than me. And again, it's one of those times where if you step back and just look at it objectively, you start to say, I don't know that is the right way to approach it. Like, I don't know that that's the right calculation to be doing and to get to. In theory, it would seem it should be at least equally as important to have them think you're a reasonable person or a humble person or a compassionate person as it would to think that you are a powerful person or a strong person or somebody who knows what they're talking about. It would seem like that. So I don't have as much of an answer here as much as I do of a question of why is that the case though, right? And again, the second level why, because maybe it's in the third level why, right? We're protecting our identity, I get it, but why aren't we protecting against looking like a jerk? Well, the way the human races function, the strong survive and the alphas do better, right? So we're optimizing for that. Okay, but why? Why is that the case? Why do the alphas do better? You would think in interactions that the person that can minimize friction, the person who can get the most people to say, hey, that's a reasonable person, in theory, that should be the person that people flock to and say, hey, if somebody's going to make decisions here or be in some position of authority or power, that would be the person. But again, it doesn't seem to be the case. You take our president right now as the perfect example. Whether you like him or not, you believe in his policies or not, most people would agree there's not a lot of humility there. There's not a lot of compassion. It's much more geared around this other piece of protecting the ego and asserting dominance and never looking weak and always looking like he has it. He understands it better than others and trust him. He's got it figured out. And you see the response, and it makes me think, what I think with him is that he's made a calculated decision to say, the way I will attain and retain power is I'm going to build a base of raving fans, right? Or raving supporters. I know I'm going to get a smaller number overall, but I'm going to get, for the supporters that I do have, right? And it might just be 50% of the population, maybe less, who knows, we'll find out soon enough, but they're going to be so strongly supportive that matters as much or more than if I had a bunch of fans or supporters who were, moderately supportive. You can almost think of it if you've ever heard of the NPS, the Net Promoter Score metric. So it's a metric that a lot of companies use to gauge like customer satisfaction. But the way that the calculation works, without getting into the details of it, is that they're really looking for kind of raving fans. So it's on a 0 to 10 scale, 10 being the best. And the calculation severely overweights for people that pick a 9 or a 10. If you pick an 8 or a 7, it almost has no impact. If you're a 6 or below in your rating, it's almost a negative impact. So the only way it shows as a positive is if it's a 9 or a 10. And the idea is you want raving fans, because those are the fans that are going to really go to bat for you, and they're going to build your brand, and they're going to advocate for you to other people. And it kind of feels like there's an overlap to that in what Trump does, and back to this point of why we optimize for looking strong and competent, is that we want that. We want, it seems as if human nature, that's what inspires that. The humility, the compassion, the reasonableness, although people might like that, and more people might like it, the level of support that it garners is too low, right? Versus that more alpha-oriented nature. You'll turn off some people, but the people you get will be at a much higher level of support. it's a hypothesis. I don't know if that's the answer. It's something that I want to think about more, but I do think this dynamic, again, even in micro situations, in a conversation where people are willing to sacrifice looking reasonable for looking strong and right and minimize being embarrassed, that's something that we really have to question and understand. Why is that the case? Because in many ways, if you don't like the current political environment, if you don't like the dynamics of the people in power, you have to say, like, well, us as a people, we might be, as humans, we might be behind that. The same way we practice it in everyday conversations, that's just being manifested out at scale when it comes to politicians or what have you, and they're just doing the same thing, and it works. That's why they do it. And maybe it ties back to this overall concept of thinking better and being better, etc. That's why it's so important, because the way to change that, the way to get us where what we gear more on is we want people that are reasonable, is we need to be more reasonable. And then it will reflect in the people that we are attracted to, from a political or social perspective. So something to think about.